Started with small things. Things most people wouldn't notice. My wife, Heather, had always been a creature of habit. Every morning, she drank her coffee black, 2 sugars, while scrolling through her emails. She'd hum a little tune as she got ready for work, the same one her mother used to sing when we visited her parents' house. It was comforting, predictable. But then the humming stopped. I thought nothing of it at first. People change. Maybe she was stressed from work. Her job at the marketing firm had been demanding lately. Then there were the late nights. Heather had never been a workaholic, but suddenly, she was logging 14-hour days. She blamed it on a major campaign. "The client is impossible," she'd say, rolling her eyes. But there was something off about the way she said it, like she was rehearsing a line for a play. The first real crack came on a Friday evening. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through Netflix, when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Heather was in the shower. Normally, I wouldn't even glance at it. We trusted each other, or at least I thought we did. But that night, the screen lit up, and I saw the name. Becca. Becca was Heather's best friend. They'd met in college and had been inseparable ever since. I liked Becca well enough. She was funny, outgoing, and fiercely loyal to Heather. But something about the message made me pause. It read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." My stomach dropped. I told myself it was nothing. Friends joke like that, right? Maybe they had some inside joke I wasn't privy to. But the emoji lingered in my mind like a stain I couldn't scrub away. When Heather came back from the shower, towel wrapped around her, I handed her the phone. "Becca texted," I said, my voice carefully neutral. Her eyes darted to the screen, and for a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Panic? Guilt? She quickly covered it with a smile. "Oh, she's just being silly. We went out for drinks last night and got a little tipsy. You know how she is." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as Heather fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Something wasn't right. I just didn't know what. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more cracks. Heather's late nights at work often coincided with Becca's Instagram posts. Pictures of cocktails and dimly lit bars. When I mentioned it, Heather brushed it off. "She lives nearby. Sometimes I meet her for a quick drink after work to vent." It sounded plausible. But why didn't she tell me beforehand? Why didn't she invite me? One night, curiosity got the better of me. Heather said she was working late again, so I decided to stop by her office with dinner as a surprise. When I arrived, the lights were off. The receptionist told me Heather had left hours ago. My chest tightened as I drove home. Heather wasn't in the house when I got there, either. I sat in the living room, the takeout bag growing cold beside me, until I heard her keys in the door at midnight. "You're up late," she said, her tone casual as if nothing was wrong. "I stopped by your office," I replied, watching her reaction carefully. Her face didn't flinch, but her hand gripped the strap of her purse a little tighter. "Oh," she said after a beat. "We finished early, so I grabbed a drink with Becca." She dropped her bag on the floor and kissed my cheek, as if that would erase my unease. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the doubt kept growing, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. That was the night I decided to find out the truth, no matter what it took. I waited until Heather left for work the next morning before I started digging. I hated myself for it. Snooping wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach any longer. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter, the lid slightly ajar. I opened it and typed in her password, our anniversary date. It worked. Relief and guilt warred within me as I navigated to her messages. There were no texts from Becca, at least none that seemed suspicious. Most were short and mundane. "Can't make lunch today?" Or, "Did you see this meme?" But when I opened her email, my heart skipped a beat. There was a folder labeled Personal buried deep within her inbox. Inside were dozens of emails between Heather and Becca, dating back months. The subject lines were innocuous, catching up, or weekend plans. But the content was anything but. "Heather, last night was incredible. I haven't felt that alive in years. Becca. I'm counting down the hours until I can see you again. You make me feel things I didn't think were possible. Heather. I wish we didn't have to hide this. It's hard pretending everything is normal at home. My stomach churned. My wife wasn't just confiding in her best friend. She was having an affair with her. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there, breathing hard. My thoughts raced in 1,000 directions. The betrayal itself was bad enough, but with Becca? Someone I trusted. Someone who had been a constant presence in our lives? The memories came flooding back. The times Becca had stayed over after a night of drinking. The way they'd giggle and whisper like teenagers. The long hugs that I chalked up to their close friendship. Had it been going on this whole time, right under my nose? I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her? Call Becca and demand answers? A part of me wanted to grab my keys, drive to her office, and let her know I wasn't an idiot. But another part of me, a darker, angrier part, wanted to wait, to gather more evidence, to see just how deep this betrayal went. I needed to be sure before I acted. That night, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I cooked dinner, asked about her day, and even laughed at one of her jokes. Heather seemed relaxed, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. After she fell asleep, I got up and quietly installed a tracking app on her phone. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed the truth. I needed to know where she went when she wasn't with me. The next day, while she was working late, I watched the app. Her location pinged at a small boutique hotel downtown. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. I drove there, parking across the street and watching the entrance. 20 minutes later, Heather walked out, laughing as Becca trailed behind her. They didn't see me, but I saw them, and that was all I needed. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It wasn't a fling. It was a full-blown affair, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I stayed in my car after they left, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind buzzed with questions. Why had Heather done this? Was I not enough for her? Or had this been brewing all along, hidden behind her easy smile and half-truths? But anger soon replaced the confusion. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and humiliated me. And Becca, someone I had welcomed into my life, trusted, was complicit in all of it. The following days were the hardest. Pretending nothing was wrong while Heather went about her routine, lying through her teeth, felt like swallowing shards of glass. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to demand answers. But that would be too easy for her. I needed something bigger. That evening, I poured myself a drink and sat at the dining table, staring at my phone. If they thought they could play me for a fool, they were sorely mistaken. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to dismantle their little fantasy, piece by piece. The first step was gathering more evidence. I needed concrete proof, not for me, but for what I was planning. If I was going to hit back, I wanted it to hurt. I started by digging into Becca's life. A quick scroll through her social media showed she was as curated online as Heather. A perfect image of a happy, single woman living her best life. But it didn't take long to find cracks. Becca's work email was linked to her Instagram account, and from there, I uncovered her LinkedIn profile. She worked as a project manager at a nonprofit, a job that undoubtedly required her to maintain a squeaky clean reputation. Good to know, I thought grimly. The tracking app on Heather's phone continued to provide a goldmine of information. Over the next 2 weeks, I mapped out their movements. The hotels, the late-night dinners, even a weekend work retreat they'd taken together. I also noticed something else. Heather had been withdrawing small amounts of cash from our joint account every few days. It wasn't much, but it added up. What was she doing with it? I resolved to find out. One night, while Heather was in the shower, I carefully searched her purse. Inside, I found a receipt for an expensive necklace from a boutique I'd never heard of. The receipt wasn't recent, it was from 2 months ago. But I had never seen her wearing it. I logged on to our bank account and combed through the transactions. There were charges I didn't recognize. Dinners at high-end restaurants, purchases from lingerie stores, and hotel bookings under Heather's name. My stomach twisted as the scope of her betrayal became clear. She wasn't just sneaking around. She was using our money to fund her affair. By the time I pieced everything together, my anger had crystallized into something cold and sharp. I knew what I had to do. Heather and Becca thought they were untouchable, that their little secret was safe. They had no idea I was watching, waiting. They wouldn't see it coming. And when I struck, it would destroy everything they'd built. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I wasn't just going to expose Heather and Becca. I was going to ruin the illusion they'd built for themselves. They thought they were clever, that they were getting away with it. That smug confidence would be their downfall. I started laying the groundwork. The first thing I did was copy all the evidence I'd gathered: emails, text messages, receipts, and even photos from the tracking app. I backed it up in multiple places: a flash drive, a cloud account, and a secure folder on my laptop. If anything happened, I wanted to make sure I had it all. Next, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My old friend Mark. Mark wasn't just a tech wizard. He had a talent for digging up dirt. I told him I needed his help, and though I kept the details vague, he didn't hesitate. "Send me what you've got," he said over the phone. "I'll see what I can do." Within a few days, Mark had uncovered a treasure trove of additional information. Becca wasn't as clean-cut as she pretended to be. She'd been skimming funds from her nonprofit, a fact Mark discovered by cross-referencing financial records with insider tips. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to raise eyebrows if it ever came to light. He also found some compromising photos of Heather and Becca together, pictures taken by someone at one of their hotels. Apparently, the staff wasn't as discreet as they thought. "This is solid," Mark said when we met up to review everything. "If you're planning to use this, it'll hit hard." I nodded, my jaw tight. "I'm not just using it. I'm burning everything to the ground." The next part of the plan involved timing. I knew Heather and Becca were planning another work retreat the following weekend. I had overheard Heather on the phone, laughing about how much she was looking forward to it. "They're so obvious," she said to Becca. "I can't believe they buy our excuses." Hearing her talk so casually about lying to me made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was an opportunity, and I wasn't going to waste it. While Heather was busy packing for her getaway, I was putting the finishing touches on my trap. I sent anonymous emails to a few key people in Becca's life, including her boss at the nonprofit and some of her prominent donors. The emails included attachments of her financial misdeeds and some of the photos Mark had found. I also reached out to a local journalist who specialized in exposing corruption. "This might be worth looking into," I wrote, attaching the evidence against Becca. "Feel free to follow up if you need more details." As for Heather, I had something far more personal planned. The night before their retreat, I printed out every damning email, receipt, and photo and placed them in a neat stack on the dining table. I also included a letter, a simple, scathing message that laid out exactly how I felt. "You destroyed our marriage. You lied to me, humiliated me, and treated me like a fool. This is your legacy now. Enjoy it." When she came home that night, I was gone. But she wouldn't be alone for long. The next part of the plan was already in motion, and it was going to hit her harder than she could ever imagine. I stayed at a friend's place that weekend, phone on silent as the trap I'd set began to unravel. I didn't need to witness the chaos firsthand to know what was happening. By now, Heather would have come home to find the evidence and my letter waiting for her. And Becca? Well, her carefully curated world was about to collapse. I checked my email the next morning, curious to see if the journalist had followed up. Sure enough, they had. "This is explosive," the reporter wrote. "We're digging deeper into the nonprofit and Becca's involvement. Thanks for the tip." I smiled grimly, imagining the panic that must have gripped Becca when her boss received the email about her financial misdeeds. It wouldn't take long for the board of directors to react, especially with their reputation on the line. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a call from Heather. I didn't answer. She called again and again. By the fifth call, she left a voicemail. "Dan, I don't know what's going on, but we need to talk. Please just pick up the phone." "This isn't what you think." I deleted the message without listening to the rest. What could she possibly say to defend herself? The evidence was irrefutable. Becca tried calling, too. Her message was shorter, angrier. You think you can just ruin my life? You're a pathetic little man who can't handle the truth. You'll regret this. Her tone only confirmed what I already knew. They weren't sorry. They were angry they'd been caught. That evening, I received a text from Mark. Check this out. It read, followed by a link. I clicked it and was taken to an article on a local news site. The headline read, "Nonprofit leader under investigation for misuse of funds." I skimmed the article, my heart racing. The journalist had worked fast, connecting the dots and publishing the story within hours. Becca's name was all over it, along with details about the evidence I'd provided. The comments section was brutal. People were furious, demanding her resignation and calling for a full audit of the nonprofit. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. They were finally facing the consequences of their actions. The next day, I returned home to find Heather sitting in the living room, the stack of evidence spread out on the coffee table. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy from crying. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "Talk about what? The affair? The lies? Or how you used our money to fund your little escapades?" Her lower lip quivered, but she held my gaze. "It's not what you think. Becca and it wasn't planned. It just happened." "Spare me the cliches," I snapped. "You betrayed me, Heather. You lied to my face while you snuck around with someone we both trusted. Do you even feel guilty? Or are you just upset you got caught?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to defend herself. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I still love you, Dan. Please, let's fix this." I laughed bitterly. "Fix this? You don't get it, do you? There's no coming back from this. You destroyed us." She fell silent, her shoulders slumping in defeat. As I turned to leave, I paused in the doorway. "By the way, you might want to check on Becca. Something tells me her weekend isn't going as planned." Heather looked up sharply, confusion mingling with fear in her eyes. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked out, leaving her to wonder just how deep the damage went. The fallout had only just begun. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos, and I stayed on the sidelines, watching as everything unraveled. Becca's scandal at the nonprofit had gained traction fast. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by multiple outlets, each one digging deeper into her financial misconduct. Former employees started coming forward with their own complaints, stories of intimidation, favoritism, and other shady practices. Her board of directors acted swiftly. By the afternoon, she was suspended pending further investigation, and donors began pulling their funding. The house of cards she'd built was collapsing faster than she could patch it up. Heather, meanwhile, had gone silent. The texts and calls stopped after our confrontation. I imagined she was too busy trying to console Becca or salvage what little remained of their relationship. Mark called me that evening. "You've created quite the mess," he said, his tone amused. "That was the idea," I replied. "Becca's done," he continued. "Her career, her reputation, it's all gone. She'll be lucky if she doesn't face criminal charges." "Good," I said simply. "And Heather?" Mark asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "She's next," I said, my tone cold. I wasn't done yet. Heather came to see me 2 days later. I was at home, packing up the last of my things. I'd already signed a lease on a small apartment across town. Staying in the house where she'd lied to me felt like trying to sleep on a bed of nails. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes hollow. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I gestured for her to come in but didn't stop packing. "Say what you need to say." Heather sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. "I know I messed up," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need you to understand it wasn't about you. It was about me. I was lost." I dropped the box I was holding and turned to face her. "Lost? Is that what you call sneaking around behind my back? Using our money to fund your affair? You weren't lost, Heather. You were selfish." She flinched but didn't argue. "You're right. I was selfish, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to know I didn't mean to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. You didn't mean to hurt me? Heather, you tore my life apart. You made me question everything I thought I knew about us. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Tears streamed down her cheeks. I never wanted it to end like this. Well, it did, I said coldly. And now you get to live with the consequences. She looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumping in defeat. What happens now? I picked up my box and headed for the door. What happens now is up to you, but don't expect me to be part of it. She didn't follow me as I left. The final blow came later that week. I sent copies of the evidence I'd gathered to Heather's family and close friends. They deserved to know the truth. I didn't include everything, just enough to show them who she really was. The fallout was immediate. Her parents, who had always been supportive of our marriage, were furious. I got a message from her mother, apologizing profusely for Heather's actions and thanking me for taking the high road. It was ironic, really. The high road wasn't where I'd been walking these past few weeks. But I didn't correct her. By the end of the week, Heather was completely isolated. Her career was in jeopardy. Her relationship with Becca was over. And the life she'd so carefully curated had crumbled to dust. And I walked away knowing I'd done what I set out to do. The only thing left was to start over. The first few days in my new apartment were quiet, almost eerily so. For years, my life had been full of routines and shared moments with Heather, and now I was left with silence. It was strange to wake up and not smell her coffee brewing in the kitchen or hear her footsteps in the hallway. I wasn't sad though, just numb. I had spent so much energy on uncovering the truth and executing my revenge that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Mark, how are you holding up? Me, better than I thought I'd be. Thanks again for everything. Mark, no problem. Just remember, don't look back. They aren't worth it. He was right. Heather and Becca weren't my concern anymore. Whatever mess they were left with was theirs to deal with, not mine. Later that week, I got a surprising phone call. It was Heather's brother, James. We'd always gotten along well, though we weren't particularly close. Dan, he began, his voice hesitant. I heard what happened. I don't know what to say. There's not much to say, I replied. Your sister made her choices, and now she has to live with them. I know, he said quickly. And I'm not defending her. What she did was awful. I just wanted you to know that I'm here if you need anything. His words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected any of Heather's family to reach out, let alone offer support. Thanks, James, I said sincerely. That means a lot. Before we hung up, he added, for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. She needed to be held accountable. As the days turned into weeks, I started rebuilding my life. I focused on work, throwing myself into projects that kept my mind occupied. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years, people I had unintentionally drifted away from during my marriage. One night, I met up with an old college buddy, Ryan, for drinks. He'd been through a divorce a few years earlier, so he understood what I was going through. Revenge feels good, doesn't it? He said with a grin as we clinked our glasses together. I shrugged. It does, but it's also exhausting. I don't want to live my life defined by what they did to me. Ryan nodded. That's the right mindset. Focus on yourself, man. They're not worth another second of your time. It was good advice, and I decided to take it. I didn't hear much about Heather or Becca after that, but bits and pieces trickled in through mutual acquaintances. Heather had moved out of the house and was staying with her parents. Becca had resigned from her nonprofit under pressure, and the investigation into her financial misconduct was ongoing. Apparently, their relationship had fallen apart under the weight of the scandal. Heather's family was furious with her, and Becca had retreated into obscurity, avoiding the public eye as much as possible. I didn't feel sorry for them. They had brought this on themselves. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The storm was over, and I was free to start anew. Just as I was beginning to find my footing, Heather reached out again. It had been almost a month since I'd last seen her, and I thought she had finally given up. But one evening, as I was sorting through the mail in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text. Heather, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but can we talk? Please, just once. I stared at the message, conflicted. Every part of me screamed to ignore her, to delete it and move on. But a tiny sliver of curiosity remained. What could she possibly have to say after everything? After a long pause, I replied, one conversation. That's it. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. My place. The next evening, Heather showed up at my door. She looked different. Tired, thinner, like the weight of her decisions had finally caught up with her. She clutched a folder in her hands, her knuckles white. Come in, I said flatly, stepping aside. She sat on the edge of the couch, her movements stiff, her gaze darting nervously around the room. I stayed standing, arms crossed, watching her with a mix of anger and pity. What do you want, Heather? I asked, my voice devoid of warmth. She swallowed hard, then placed the folder on the coffee table. I know I've already lost you. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. But I need you to know how sorry I am. I ruined everything, Dan, and I hate myself for it. I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch between us. Heather opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. This is the house. I've signed over my share to you. It's yours now, free and clear. I frowned, unsure of what to say. The house had been the last thing on my mind. I don't want it, I said finally. It's nothing but bad memories. Her lips trembled. Then sell it. Do whatever you want with it. I need to do something right for once. Her words felt hollow, but I took the papers anyway. Is that all? She hesitated, then shook her head.
No.
There's one more thing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. When she opened it, I saw the necklace, the one from the receipt I'd found in her purse. This was meant for Becca, she said quietly. But I don't want it anymore. It doesn't mean anything. I thought, maybe you could sell it or donate it or, I don't know. I stared at the necklace, its delicate chain catching the light. It was a beautiful piece, but it felt tainted, like everything else she'd touched. I don't want it, I said, my tone firm. Heather nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I deserve that. As she stood to leave, she looked at me one last time. For what it's worth, I'll regret this for the rest of my life. I loved you, Dan. I really did. I just lost my way. I didn't answer. Couldn't. When she walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, relief, and something I couldn't quite name. Maybe closure. I wasn't sure if I believed her regrets. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done letting her regrets define my future. After Heather left, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the folder she had handed me. The house was mine now. A part of me wanted to burn the papers, to sever every tie to that place and everything it represented. But practicality won out. Selling it would give me the financial freedom to rebuild my life. The necklace sat on the coffee table, a cold reminder of the betrayal. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. Its beauty was undeniable, but its significance made my stomach churn. I placed it in a drawer out of sight. I figured out what to do with it later. The next morning, I called a realtor and began the process of listing the house. Sell it fast, I said. I don't care about the price. Just get it off my hands. The realtor was efficient, and within a week, the house was on the market. Walking through it one last time felt surreal. Each room held memories, both good and bad, and I was ready to let them go. With the house no longer weighing me down, I focused on myself. For too long, my life had revolved around Heather and our marriage. It was time to rediscover who I was without her. I joined a gym, something I'd been putting off for years. The physical exertion was cathartic, a way to channel my anger and frustration into something productive. I started eating better, sleeping more, and cutting back on the late-night drinks that had become a crutch. I also started therapy, though I'd been hesitant at first. The idea of spilling my deepest thoughts to a stranger felt daunting, but I knew I couldn't carry the weight of everything on my own. My wife cheated on me with her best friend, I told the therapist during our first session, and I retaliated by tearing their lives apart. She didn't judge, which was a relief. Instead, she asked, "And how do you feel about what you did?" I thought about it for a long moment. Satisfied, I guess, but also tired. I don't want to keep feeling like this. That's a good place to start, she said with a small smile. As the weeks went by, I found myself thinking about Heather and Becca less and less. They were still out there, somewhere, dealing with the wreckage of their choices. But their drama was no longer my burden to bear. I reconnected with James, Heather's brother. Despite everything, he had been a solid support system, checking in on me regularly. "Have you heard from her?" I asked one evening as we grabbed a drink at a local bar. "She's staying with my parents," he said. "They're not happy with her, but they won't throw her out. She's a mess, Dan. She knows she screwed up." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I didn't feel the same searing anger I once had, either. James studied me for a moment. "You're doing better than I expected. Honestly, I think you're handling this better than she is." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not looking back. I'm done with her." That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept without tossing and turning. The weight on my chest had started to lift, replaced by something that felt suspiciously like hope. I wasn't healed yet, but I was on my way. A week after Heather's visit, I received an email from Becca. Subject: "You win." Body: "Congratulations, Dan. You destroyed everything. I hope it was worth it." I deleted it without responding. She wasn't looking for resolution, just a way to claw back some control. Later, James called. "Heather told me she's thinking of moving out of state. Starting over," he said. "That's probably for the best," I replied. Hearing that gave me an odd sense of finality. It didn't matter where she went. For me, she was already gone. The house sold quickly. The realtor handed me the final paperwork, and I walked away with a hefty check and no regrets. Driving past it one last time, I didn't feel anger or sadness, just relief. That chapter was officially closed. I was ready for the next one. With the house behind me, I channeled my energy into building something new. I took on a promotion at work, pouring myself into projects that challenged me. The long hours kept my mind occupied and gave me a sense of purpose. On weekends, I joined a hiking group. Being out in nature, surrounded by strangers who didn't know my story, was a relief. Each step felt like a small reclaiming of myself. Heather and Becca became less of a shadow. The focus was finally on me, not them. One weekend, during a group hike, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Lily. She was funny, down-to-earth, and refreshingly straightforward. We talked about everything from favorite books to the best local pizza spots. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine connection with someone. At the end of the hike, she handed me her number with a smile. "Call me if you ever want to grab coffee or, hike again." It was a small moment, but it felt like the start of something new. I waited a few days before texting Lily. Something about this felt different, and I didn't want to rush. When I finally sent a message, she replied almost immediately. "Me, coffee this weekend?" "Lily, only if you're ready for the world's worst latte art." We met at a small cafe downtown. Conversation flowed easily, and for the first time I laughed, really laughed, without forcing it. As I walked her to her car afterward, she said, "You seem like someone who's been through a lot, but you're still standing. That's impressive." It was the first time I felt proud of where I was. Lily and I started seeing each other regularly. Hikes, dinners, quiet nights at the park. She didn't push for details about my past, and I didn't feel the need to overshare. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Life wasn't about the betrayal or the revenge anymore. It was about rediscovering joy in the little things. Her laugh, the way the sun felt during a hike, or the simplicity of a good meal. She made me realize I didn't need to be defined by what had happened. I could move forward. Months passed, and what started as casual meetings with Lily turned into something deeper. She brought out the best in me, and I found myself smiling more, worrying less. One evening, as we sat on a hillside watching the sunset, she leaned into me and said, "You're not the same man I met on that first hike. You seem lighter." "I think I am," I admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward instead of back." And I meant it. Heather and Becca were just a distant memory now. A painful lesson I'd learned and moved on from. This was my fresh start, and I was ready to embrace it.